this was about as bizarre and as easy as it gets.
So the number for me was a number that would allow me to never have to work.
I feel like we got top.
I went from a sale of $500,000 to in debt.
$192 million.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warlow.
Hey there, it's John Warlow. Listen, if you're brand new to Built to Sell Radio, welcome. It's good to have you along for the ride. We've been doing this show now for 5 years. I've interviewed literally a different entrepreneur every week for the past 5 years, and I've taken some of their best practices, their tips and tricks and negotiation hacks, and distilled them all into a field guide. It's a book called The Art of Selling Your Business, and it is a little bit of a recipe card for you to punch above your weight when it comes to negotiating with an acquirer. You can get it at builttosell.com/selling. My next guest, Mike Malatesta, built a waste management company up. He started off driving a truck, which makes his sale for $51.5 million that much more incredible. He talks a lot about the experience of building to sell his company. And in particular, I want you to listen for the mistake he made in negotiating the sale of his business, a mistake that he estimates cost him around $4 million. We also talk about the difference between recurring and reoccurring revenue. The former made a big difference to the value of his company. Here to tell you the entire story is Mike Malatesta. Mike Malatesta, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Hey, John, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so you started AWS. Now, AWS is, when people hear that, they're going to think Amazon Web Services. Mike started AWS, but it's a different AWS. Tell me what you guys did.
It is a different AWS, unfortunately. There's a trademark lesson there somewhere, because I think we were first. So AWS is short for Advanced Waste Services, and Advanced Waste Services is a company that I co-founded in 1992. And we started as a trucking company, trucking wastewater from manufacturers' plants to water treatment plants. And then over the years, John, we started treating wastewater ourselves, and then we started processing waste from all kinds of different waste from manufacturing operations. And then we grew into 5 states, and we added all kinds of tangential value-add services to the trucking, and then we ultimately ended up as a $45 million or so revenue company.
Amazing. So if I've got a manufacturing facility and I've got dirty waste that I can't just toss in the garbage, I hire you guys to come get rid of it for me.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it, because we handle pretty much everything that you couldn't put in the garbage. So so the trash, not our thing. Everything else, our thing.
Got it. It sounds like a capital-intensive business. How did you finance it?
Well, at the beginning, we financed it with 401k, loans from our parents, the little bit of money that we had, and we also were fortunate enough to get a bank loan, largely because we did have capital. We were buying trucks and equipment that if the thing failed, they could turn around and easily sell. So that's how we got it off the ground initially. It was just $100,000 or so in equity from me and my partners, and then $250 or $200 from a bank.
And how did you guys split up the equity with the partners? Was it just sort of a 50-50 deal down the middle, or did you base it on how much equity you put in, how much cash you put into it? How did you structure that?
It was, so it initially it was the amount of capital that we put in. So it was a straight sort of thing. I'm not sure that was the best move or not, but that's how we did it. And over time, we had a few structural changes in our partnership that we can, go into or not go into. So the relative percentages changed over time, but we basically went from the money you put in, and then when I last bought out my partners, we were equal partners.
Got it. Got it. That's helpful. And so you built this business up. You started in 92, is that right?
Yes, November.
And you sold in 2015.
That's right. Yeah.
And you were 45 million when you sold. What was the top line?
Yeah, around 45.
And how many employees?
150.
Man, that sounds like a lot of people to manage.
It gets easier as you get bigger.
Oh yeah? In what way?
Well, lots of ways. I mean, it's, well, if you want it to get easier, it gets easier. I should say that. So it gets easier as you get bigger because you have a lot more people that are worrying about things that you as a founder or CEO would normally be worrying about on at a smaller level. You also have people that are creative and bring, great ideas that you never thought of. And those, help improve the business. They improve the process of the business, which is a huge thing.
How did you evolve as a leader? 92 to 2015. It's a long stretch.
Yeah.
Started the business from scratch to 150 employees. I'd imagine you evolved a lot. Like what was the evolution of Mike as a boss?
Yeah, slow. So I guess so I feel like I had some natural leadership tendencies, but like a lot of people that have natural leadership tendencies, they also have control tendencies. And I had control tendencies, not overtly like do it my way or, but non-overtly. So it's kind of like you create a system. I created a system where, ultimately everything came up to me because I wanted to make sure that the decision we make is the right decision. And that got me so far. Really got me to about 10 years, through about the first 10 years, John. And then
give me top line revenue in 10 years. Like how did that form of management get you to? What did that?
Yeah, 10.
10 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I had basically created a monster that I didn't like. And I call it being in, like hitting a wall and being in dropping into a valley of uncertainty. So here I was, 10 years along, having, employed this leadership strategy that seemed to work, but it was no longer making me happy. And if I'm not happy, the business probably isn't doing as well as it could be doing. And so it took a little bit of a journey for me after that to understand why I had created where I was. Like I was blaming it in my mind on other things and other people, but it was really about me. I mean, it all happened because I asked it to happen that way. So getting clear about that and then, figuring out what are the resources that I need to avail myself to, because I had been a very insular person too, John. I mean, it was 100% on the business, in the business every day. I didn't, I was one of those people who are like, oh, I don't have time to go to that. I mean, I felt like people who were out at networking events and stuff were just lazy, they just weren't focused enough on their business. It was crazy. So, so then took a little bit of a journey, and then I started to first of all, I started to really think about what I wanted, and then I had to find help. I had to go outside for the first time in a long time and ask for help, find help, and learn from other people.
And where did you go next? Where did you find that help?
Well, the first thing I did was I joined a roundtable group at the city's Chamber of Commerce, which was very helpful. And it's like it's like a forum, and I know we'll talk about EO and some other things, but it's like a forum, but not. It's very loose. But it was my first sort of thing, and I was around people from different industries, CEOs or presidents or entrepreneurs, whatever. So that was the first thing, and that got me sort of started. At least I took the first step, and then I realized that there were limitations to this. This was not going to get me where I wanted to be. So the next thing I did was I joined Strategic Coach, and Strategic Coach is a wonderful, wonderful program for entrepreneurs that I think saved my entrepreneurial life, really. Taught me so many things, exposed me to so many ideas, gave me the confidence that what I was feeling wasn't it wasn't a sentence, it was just a phase. And if I wanted to get past the phase, I could do it. So Strategic Coach taught me a lot about how to do that. And then I joined, it's called Vistage now. In Wisconsin at the time, it was called Tech. And Vistage is another wonderful program for business leaders that really teaches you strategic and tactical things about business that most of which I had not ever been exposed to. And then finally I joined YPO.
Young Presidents Organization. So you got lots of outside input from other entrepreneurs, it sounds like. And
Right. Because every time I took one step, I realized that there was something about that step that wasn't getting me all the way to where I wanted to be. And so everything that I layered in on top of that was to fill what I perceived to be a need that I wasn't having filled from the others. But I didn't stop one and start the other. I did them together because they were all benefiting me in some significant way, I thought.
You mentioned the conversation around partners. It's funny, partners has been on my mind lately. I just did an interview with a guy named Greg Alexander who built a company, and it was in the consulting space. And he, in his mind, this consulting company used to trade around 1.2 times revenue. So in the early days, it was just him and he hired a couple of employees, and in part to make them feel like they were his partners and like he had sort of, friends along the way. He gave equity to these people. And it was a very early in the process. And again, he thought his business was trading at 1 times revenue. And long story short, he builds the company to $30 million in revenue when he gets an offer of $162 million for a $30 million company. And he realizes he has made an $80 million mistake because he has given 2 employees who were great employees, but not $80 million employees, a huge chunk of the company. You alluded to the idea of your partners and how that ownership change structured. What's the story there?
Well, so the first structure change we had was one of my partners was working in for another company in the trash business, and they essentially made it. He had an important position there. They made a divestiture, and he, for some reason, did a very kind thing, and he took a part of the divestiture and he basically made it an asset of our company. And so at that time, in exchange for that, we all got basically more than what we had put into the company in the beginning. So it was really a recapitalization, and it leveled out our playing field from a percentage basis.
Who's our?
Oh, sorry. So me and 3 partners.
Okay.
So the original partners. Yeah. And then so that did that, and then one of my partners passed away in 2003, and that caused another reshuffling because the company took in his shares as treasury, and so that made the remaining 3 of us 33% roughly shareholders. So that's kind of the dynamic of how that transpired.
Wow. What was it like to lose a partner? Was that expected, or was it a sudden event, or
yeah?
What was the backstory there?
Yeah, in a word, it was horrible.
I imagine.
So his name was Butch, and it was he and I that started the business. The other 2 folks, Larry and Chuck, came in as investors. And interestingly, we had never considered partners, when we first put our business plan together and stuff, besides the 2 of us, because we kind of thought we had it all figured out. And when we went to get the bank loan, they said, yes, we'll give you the bank loan, but you have to have 25,000 more in equity. And we just didn't have it. So Chuck and Larry, the two guys came in, basically allowed us to start the company, but it wasn't something that we had planned at all. And we didn't know them very well either. But getting back to Butch, so it was horrible because Butch died as a result of a fire in one of our plants. So he was working on something, it caught on fire, tank, it caught on fire, and he was inside of the tank, and it burned him very, very badly. So he lived for 3 days, and after that, and then passed away. So it was the worst kind of partnership transition that you could imagine having. Not just losing a phenomenal man and a phenomenal partner, but the family, dealing with the family issues related to that, all the buy-sell stuff, all the OSHA. I mean, everything about it was just horrible and unfortunate.
Imagine. I hear about the exit planners talk about the 4Ds and it's so, in many cases, esoteric. It's sort of this theory, but you lived it like big time, real.
Right. Yeah. It's like, they say about insurance, right? It's like the thing you buy and hope you'll never need, right? You never think you're going to need it. Well, we didn't think any differently than anyone else. They made us get it, and we put a buy sell together and we had to have it. So we had it. And never thought we'd need it. And then one day, we needed it, unfortunately.
How does that work? Because Butch's shares, when he passed, would have presumably transferred to his next of kin. Is that how it works? Or did you have that agreement such that the insurance paid? So
we had a funding mechanism for it.
What does that mean, a funding mechanism?
Well, key man life insurance policy.
Okay.
So from the beginning when we drew it up, John, none of us wanted to partner with one of our wives or someone else. It just didn't feel like that would be right for anybody. So we made sure that we had it funded, and we always had the right to purchase the shares. They would not transfer to a family member or something unless we couldn't pay.
So if I understand this correctly, you have an insurance policy that in the event of the death of one of the owners, it triggers. So there's a payment that pays for his shares effectively.
Yeah. Well, it pays for yes, you hope it, you start at, you basically set the insurance level where you think the payment is going to need to be or over. And then you hope that as the business grows, you remember that and you keep adjusting to it, because obviously you put yourself in a squeeze if you're underfunded.
Right. And so how did you value the business for that purpose?
We had a formula in the buy sell, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was a simple formula that maybe it netted out assets and added a multiple to it, similar to the way you'd sell a business. Not that you'd sell it by netting out assets, but same basic concept, and that's what we did.
Okay. And did it turn out you had enough money to fund it?
We did.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So was that the ownership structure after that catastrophic event? Was there other changes to the ownership, or did you just ride it through you and the two other partners along the way?
There were, in 2013, I was able to buy out my remaining two partners through a combination of money that I could borrow and a note that they would take. So so that happened in 2013, and after that we had a 1% shareholder, someone that we had given some shares to, sort of like what you were talking about before we, with that earlier story, but not anything,
Greg, yeah.
not anything like that from a numbers standpoint. And then after I bought out my partners, I invited two long-time team members who had been very instrumental in the business to buy in, because I'd wanted that for a long time, John. But we just, with our structure, it just wasn't something that made sense until.
What was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, with your two other partners? Like, what triggered you to want to buy them out?
They did. So they were both 15 years older than me, give or take. And we'd had a long run, 20 years together, starting with partners, who barely knew each other, right? Mm-hmm. It was a wonderfully long ride together, and we did really well together. But there came a time when they wanted to, get their investment back, and they approached me about it, and we had that buy sell still, but the number that the buy sell indicated, the formula was, I just couldn't pay that much. I couldn't borrow that much. And they both wanted to get out at the same time. And so, to their credit, we negotiated sort of a side deal off of the buy sell that worked for all three of us, and that's how we were able to get that done.
Got it. Because your business had grown substantially. Like, where were you in 2013 as it relates to revenue, employees, that kind of stuff?
We were probably in the 40 million range.
And did you have a sense of what it was worth at that point, like the company?
Well, sure. I mean, we had a sense of what it was worth, but we didn't have an offer. We didn't have an offer.
Yeah. What did you think it was worth, ballpark?
I mean, I thought it was worth 15 or 20, probably 20.
Okay. And so that would have meant that you would have had to cut a huge check to your partners.
Right. That's right.
And so what do you think, if I'm one of the partners, I'm like, hey, I took the risk like you. Why did I get to bear the burden? How did you have that conversation? What was that like to have that conversation that effectively meant that they were going to take less than the quote unquote market value of what their shares were worth, if that makes sense? Yeah.
Well, again, I give them a lot of credit. They, it wasn't like I said, well, I can only pay this much. And they were like, okay, well, that's all you can do. That's all you can do. But we kept talking. We were open to conversation, and we'd had a lot of trust built up between one another for a long time. And, I think they recognized, the reality that I couldn't come up with that money. I mean, they know the finances, they know the availability. So I think they were able to reconcile that, to themselves, and the fact that it was they who wanted to leave. They could have stayed.
Could they have forced you to sell the company?
Yeah, could have. Yeah. But they never did. I mean, they treated me like for the most part, they treated me with what I would call tremendous respect and regard for having, been instrumental in getting the company to where it is, and not being possessive about it from a, strictly from a share standpoint, which was their right. They could have done that. A lot of people would have done that, but they did not.
I'm putting words in Greg, the guy I referenced earlier's mouth, but I got the sense that there may have been a pinch of, what's the word? Resentment, maybe, that he had given this equity, and it was his error. He admitted it, but at the end of the day, he felt that it maybe like he'd done a lot of the work to get the business to where it was. Was that something you experienced at all, that sense of resentment? Like, you guys kicked in a bit of cash when we were a tiny business, and yet here it has blossomed. I've done all the work. I've been, sweating it. Did you feel any of that sort of, I don't know, I can't think of a better word than resentment towards your shareholders who had benefited maybe disproportionately to then? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, you're making a lot of sense. And I don't think I'd be human if I hadn't thought that from time to time, John. But I never got fixated on it, because there's the opposite story to that story. And that is, well, if these guys hadn't come along, you wouldn't have what you have, and you wouldn't have been able to do what you've been able to do, and all of those things. So I think I definitely did I have those thoughts? Definitely. Did I stay wallowed in those thoughts for long? No, because I was always able to kick my own ass and say, here's the reality. And one thing I've learned over years and years and years, for me, if I've made a deal with somebody, I made it with the best knowledge I had, and thinking that it would make me happy and everybody else. So I don't look back at those things and go, wow, what if, or kick myself over paying someone more than I thought they were worth. If that was the deal, yeah, does it sting? Yeah, it stings a little bit, but that's the deal. So yeah, that's how I process it.
Got it. So you, in any event, build the business up beyond 2013. You've got a couple of key managers now who are now shareholders as well, it sounds like.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
What triggered you to want to sell in 2015?
A visit. So I, around Thanksgiving, I got an email from a company that we did some business with, not a lot, but some. It was one of those, like, it was from a salesperson. It's like, hey, Mike, the guy who runs our division is coming into town. I was wondering if we could, get some lunch together. And so I said, sure, because I thought it was going to be one of those, thanks for doing business with us. Hey, can we do more business? What more business? Just a regular sort of.
So he's a salesman from what company? What is he selling you?
Oh, so it was, a salesperson from a company called Covanta that we did business with. So she was our account rep.
Okay. And what business did you do with Covanta? Like, what do they do, and what was the nature of the business you guys did together?
Yeah. So Covanta their primary business is operating plants that burn trash to create electricity or steam.
Cool. So they take garbage, they burn it, and it makes electricity. And some of the garbage that you had, they thought they could burn and make more electricity. Was that the idea?
Yeah. So yes. So the what we had wasn't garbage; it was industrial waste. And why they liked industrial waste is because they could charge more for it than they could charge for garbage. So it was a way to prop up margins, and it all went through the same process that the garbage went through. So, assuming it doesn't mess up the process, it's an easy way to juice a return, get a better return. So that's the business that we were doing with them at the time.
Got it. So they would buy the industrial waste from you, and they would then turn it into electricity. Is that
we pay them like 4 times what they would be paid for garbage. So that's what I mean. It was.
So you paid them.
We paid them, right? Right.
You paid them to take the stuff off your hands.
Yeah, we pay them that because it's sort of a growing trend especially for larger companies to want their waste to be destroyed rather than landfilled. So they're willing to pay more for destruction, and so they're willing to pay more. And Covanta had the destruction facilities, John, and so it was a natural thing for us to approach them and say, hey, we have this material. They want it destroyed, and then pay what they wanted for it.
Got it. And so the sales rep calls you up, says, hey, Mike, can we get lunch? My division manager is coming to town. where does it go from there?
Yeah. So at the lunch, instead of talking about, how we can do more business together and that, chit chatty stuff, he said to me that, they were thinking about getting into the industrial waste side of the business to be closer to the actual customer. And they had already purchased one company in another part of the country, and they were looking to build out something in the Midwest. And so that's where the conversation started, John.
What was your reaction to that?
It took me by surprise for a number of reasons. One, it was completely different from what I thought the conversation would be like. And I thought it was, it wasn't like a private conversation. We had like 4 or 5 people around. So that was one part of it. And the second was I would not have seen that coming. It never occurred to me that company would have an interest in doing what he was telling me they had an interest in doing.
And so once you realized it was a conversation they were having about acquiring your business,
yeah,
what emotions went through your mind at that point?
Well, for a while, like a few weeks or something, I just let it go. I was just like, man, I don't really see this. And I didn't, it wasn't at the time, it wasn't a company that, we were sort of friendly. We were sort of competitors and also customers of one another, right? Which is common in a lot of businesses. It's common in the waste business, common in a lot of businesses. But it wasn't like I was like, oh, that's the company that's doing such a great job. I want to follow that and be part of that. It wasn't like that. So I just kind of let it ride for a few weeks. And then over the Christmas break, my wife and I went to dinner, like a birthday party dinner at a friend's house. And we were about 10 years younger than all of the other couples that were there. And 3 or 4 of them had sold businesses at some point, and they all seemed really happy. Like they just seemed happy, like not a care in the world, And so I came away from that dinner and I was thinking to myself, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I should spend a little more time on it. And so I did, and I started running some numbers and started saying to myself, okay, well, where do I have, kind of stuff you do? Where do you have to be where, it makes sense? And so I got there, and my wife and I were like, yeah, if we can get this makes sense for us.
What's the calculation you're doing in your head, Mike?
Lifetime of, if I don't want to do anything else, and can I live the way that I live now and not have to worry about anything? It was pretty much that simple. And then it just put numbers to that, John. And so, yeah, so then I re-engaged and I had some more conversations with them. And
so before we get into those conversations, though, how did you initiate? So after the Christmas dinner and all these happy entrepreneurs, you're like, maybe they know something I don't. Right. So how did you re-engage with the division head from Covanta? Yeah, so I just called him and I said, hey, I've been thinking about it, because I hadn't had any interaction with him after the lunch. So, and he gave me space, obviously, because I hadn't heard from him either. And so I said, I've been thinking about it, and maybe there's something that can be done here. I knew what the next step was, but I asked, what's the next step you want to take? And, he signed the NDA and provide some numbers, and so that's what I did, John. And then at the same time, I approached another what I thought would be a potential acquirer that had tried to acquire us earlier, and I said, look,
there might be an opportunity now because we have been approached by another company. Time might be right. Are you guys interested in? So I kind of created my own parallel process, which, probably, I don't think that's the right thing for everybody to do. Not without some help, but I had been through investment banking processes before, and I like everybody, I was like, oh, I can do that. Just do it myself, right? So I basically created my own.
You're a control freak still. You never got that out of your system, apparently.
Well, yeah, I created my own investment banking process between these two firms, and ultimately the one of the offers was significantly better than the other. I'm not sure which party was right, but one was significantly better than the other, and that's
on a percentage basis. Mike, what was the difference in offers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say it was probably 25%. It was big. It's a big number. So after I went through that process, then I made a decision to move forward with a letter of intent with Covanta, the company that ended up acquiring us.
And what was your reaction to the letter of intent when you saw it and you saw the kind of financial terms that they were prepared to offer?
Well, I remember I showed it to my CFO, who had become a shareholder after my original partners. Mm-hmm. So I brought her into my office and I just gave it to her, and her eyes got really wide. She's like, she looks at me and she's like, "You have to take this." I was like, "Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I wanted you to look at it and see if I was thinking the right thing."
What was the offer?
Well, it started out about $55 million or so, and it was a big number, John.
What does that feel like you started a business in 1992.
Yeah. I was driving trucks.
You're driving a truck.
Yeah.
And suddenly someone's put a piece of paper in front of you that's saying that they want to buy your business for $55 million. What's that feel like?
Well, it doesn't feel bad. I can tell you that. I don't know if I can tell you exactly what it feels like, but it doesn't feel bad. It felt good. I mean, it felt like, all the stuff that you work on can pay off, that it can happen. But of course, a letter of intent is just a non-binding number, John. There's a lot to do between that and actually, closing on a sale. But I'd also, by that time I'd bought or been in the process or involved in the process of buying, 12, 13 companies. So I never as the seller, always as the buyer, but I had a pretty good idea of, how these things work and what you can expect and how it makes someone feel. I mean, the people that we bought, that they felt good about, being able to monetize what had been just an imagined outcome, because it's just imaginary until someone puts a number in front of you. Or
what multiple of earnings did the 55 million represent?
It was about 8.2 or 3, I think.
Got it. And I'm assuming that the acquirer was using earnings as the primary driver of value, right? They were they were
using EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume most of your listeners know what that is.
Yeah, I would think so. Earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, but yes.
Well done. Yeah. You got it. So that's, that people talk about discounted cash flow and these other ways, but most of the transactions that I've been involved with, either as an investor or a seller, have been, EBITDA based with maybe a little bit of like how much capital does it take to keep this business going every year. But that's essentially that's what was used as the primary way to value it.
And I'm assuming it was on a what do they say? It's like a debt-free, cash-free basis, meaning you had to clear off any debt on the business with the proceeds. Is that how that were in advance of basically transacting?
Yeah. That is how it worked. Yeah. So you got to pay off everything you owe people. And in debt at least. And then you have a, working capital adjustment to handle the sort of payable, receivable mix, keep the business going. And then you keep whatever excess cash there is, right? Excess of the working capital need, if there is any.
The other offer was 25% lower. Were you able to create a bit of a bidding war at all? Did you get them to kind of nudge up at all? Or was it sort of, how did that work? No,
they came up, but it's just, they just couldn't come up. They just couldn't come up with, I shouldn't say they couldn't. They didn't want to come up to the level that, the other offer was. Even though they didn't know what the other offer was, they didn't want to come up, past the point where they stopped. So I think they came up twice, John.
Wow.
But, it wasn't close. There were other considerations, not to say that money wasn't maybe the largest consideration, but the other consideration was that the company that had the lower offer also had, an established infrastructure for the type of business that we are. So, there's clearly going to be job reductions and, synergies and all of that other stuff if I went with them, where with Covanta, the company was going to be what they called a platform company. So they were basically going to rely upon the management and the infrastructure and the people that we had to, because they didn't have people doing those kinds of things. So it was a good opportunity to keep everyone employed, and a good opportunity, I thought, to accelerate the advancement potential for some of the key players who could advance at a much slower level if they, stayed with us doing what we were doing.
Got it. Was it a bidding war where A comes up, B goes up, or was Covanta's offer first and final at 55, and then, the other person you nudged up twice, or was it back and forth along the way?
I don't think we went back and forth with Covanta until after I signed the letter of intent. Before, I was just using them as sort of the high water mark.
Got it. And I'd be curious to know how you nudged the other side. I mean, it sounds like you did not say, look, I've got an offer of X from Y. It was, you alluded to the offer. I'd be curious to know what you did and what advice you might provide to other entrepreneurs who want to create that bidding war, but also don't want to overplay their hand and come off like a kind of a dick in the process, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely didn't do that. I mean, I knew these people a little bit because of, my past experience with them. I respected them and what they had built. They'd done a great job. So, I wasn't going to be the person who told them what to do. Instead, I think I just was very respectful in the process. And I said, look, guys, because ultimately they're looking at, the construction of the EBITDA in the company one way, and the other company is looking at it the other way. So the only thing that I could really do was talk to them about why I thought the way that they were looking at it, like assuming they were using the same multiple, which they probably were, they were just looking at the EBITDA differently. And so I said, well, and I would always say, well, I mean, this isn't verbatim, of course, but I would I would say, I can appreciate you looking at it this way. The other company's looking at it a different way. And I think you should at least consider, this, or this. So I just did my best to sort of move them up. In retrospect, I could have, like I said, I was sort of playing investment bank. I could have hired an investment bank to do this, and maybe they would have been more successful, engaging others, and also, getting this second option to move up more aggressively. But I didn't do that, and I don't regret not doing it, even though the investment bankers can bring a lot of value to the sale of a company, especially if you aren't well versed in these things.
Sounds like in your case though, you'd done it a dozen times.
Yeah, I felt like I was
side.
well versed, but I was probably I probably wasn't as well versed as I was convincing myself I was. But
sorry, Mike.
But I also didn't want to process. I didn't want to be out on the street with books, in front of 100 people asking them to bid on the business. That just wasn't what I wanted to do.
You mentioned looking at the EBITDA and interpreting it through a different lens, or thinking. It sounds like you thought of the EBITDA as somewhat subjective, like it was a creative project as opposed to a black and white, like this is the EBITDA of the company. Yeah. What do you mean by they were looking at the EBITDA differently? Like, isn't the EBITDA just the EBITDA?
The EBITDA is the EBITDA, but the construction of it can be different and looked at differently. So, for example, we had a large portion of our EBITDA was recurring revenue based, which of course most acquirers love recurring revenue. So we had a lot of that, a lot of recurring revenue, or recurring EBITDA. But we also had a project component to our business. So that project component could be episodic. So sometimes, we'd have a big project. Sometimes we wouldn't have a big project. You're betting basically, our history had said that we will continue to have these big projects, but they're not booked. They're not even jobs right now. They haven't happened yet. And so I think there's you can get hung up on what's the value. Is the value of an episodic revenue or EBITDA dollar the same as the value of a recurring revenue? And ultimately, the one company said, acquirer said, well, we think it's closer to 1-to-1 than the other, I guess. And so and again, I'm not in their internal meetings, so I don't know. This is some speculation on my part, but I've done enough of these things since then and after then, or before then and after then, that I'm sure that was, I would have been asking those questions if I was on the acquiring side.
What proportion of your revenue was recurring?
So about, in a given year, about 5 or 6 million would be non-recurring, or, recurring, but not the same, I guess. So we seem to get it all the time, but it didn't come from the same spaces. So technically non-recurring.
I guess I think of the different as reoccurring, as in like a rash that you keep getting, but you don't know when you're going to get it, versus recurring being, subscription based or predictable recurring. So
that's a good way to look at it. I hadn't heard that before, but I like that. Yeah, recurring versus reoccurring. Yes. Yeah.
So it sounds like you had about 5 or 6 million of reoccurring revenue, and the rest was recurring.
Right.
Wow, big proportion.
Yeah. Well, I'm a smokestack kind of guy. That's how I grew up. That's the business that I grew up in. The way that our business worked is recurring revenue, covers all the overhead, makes it, keeps everybody employed, makes sure you got cash in the bank and all that. And the other, juice really is the one that produces the majority. It's like a waterfall. And that's how we, of course, when we first started the business, we didn't understand that, but as we came to be better business people, began to understand how that would work. And so that was our model really for doing it.
Got it. That's for sure helpful. I want to kind of get underneath some because I looked at the Covanta press release and it released the sale price is 50.5. And you mentioned the LOI, and I think you alluded to this, that there was some drop off between the LOI and the final.
Yeah.
So the LOI was at 55. So what happened?
Yeah. So, so this is where an investment banker would probably have been helpful. The number ended up being 51.5, John. I think I think that's the number.
Okay. 50. Okay.
So there's a $4 million gap. So what happened was we had a 90-day due diligence period, and during that 90-day period, their team started to really digging in on the reoccurring versus recurring, and ultimately, I think I made a mistake, because I still had these notes to my partners, and the
notes being
loans. Yeah,
loan.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So I owed them money because of the buyout, and the way that our agreement was written was that if I still owed them money and sold the business, there would be a step up.
What does that mean, a step up?
Step up. So, the value that I paid them for their shares would go up if I sold the business for more than the, our agreement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so in order for me to move forward with this and avoid a step up and fulfill my obligation to them, I would have to pay them in full before I could close. And so, where I think I made a mistake, and relatively speaking, was letting I let the acquirer know that I had to do this, and because it was a big deal for me, I had to. There was a lot that went into doing that. Like a lot of risk. And as I think about,
if they hadn't closed on the transaction, you would have paid out the stepped up fee, but then be out the cash and no transaction.
That's right.
That was the risk you were looking at.
Yeah, right. It's like a risk. It was like back to a startup sort of risk, because it wasn't an insignificant amount. But anyway. So I think I made a mistake by letting them know that, and then they started to get more aggressive about wanting to walk back some of the value on the reoccurring part of the business. And so they came back with a different number, and I was really mad at myself, John, because I felt like I walked into a trap. Now I don't know that they even had that conversation, so that's why I got past it quickly, because I could spend my whole life trying to think about that. But in the end, since the number that they had offered me first was higher than the number that I wrote on the piece of paper, in the beginning, I said to myself, well, I don't want to I don't want to walk back like this, but they're not like totally wrong with what they're saying. And it's still good, it's still good for me. And so, I took it.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And it's, not uncommon. We hear about retrading and all the time. So it's very common. I want to make sure I understand for our listeners, especially so they can kind of understand the mistake that you feel like you might have made in revealing that information about the step up and the need to pay back so in what way did that undermine your negotiating leverage? Like why did that make you weak? Maybe I just need to understand the mechanics of how that would work. If you had agreed to the sale, you would have had to pay them back, but you would have had the money from the sale to pay them back. So what was that? Maybe I just need to understand the risk better.
Yeah. So the risk was in the timing. So if essentially we had a valuation established with my partners and it was at X level.
Yeah.
And so this offer was at Y level. So if I still owed them money under the note, when I sold it at Y level, their level would step up to Y level, and so the proceeds that I would get would be they would be significantly reduced. So it was important to it was important for me to be live up to my obligation to them, to what we agreed to, but to do that I had to do it without the certainty of a close, because that was the way it had to be. If that makes sense.
The way that the agreement was written, it was prior to receiving the money that you would have to.
Yeah, not prior
to,
right, not prior to an agreement to do it or anything like that. Prior to a close. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll put round numbers on it. So you, for sake of argument, let's just make it fun and say you owed them $100 and you stood to gain $150 from the sale, but the idea was that you had to write a check for $100 in advance of receiving the $150.
Yes.
If I probably butchered. I probably made it much less.
I think that's clear enough. It paints a picture.
It's probably butchered it, but I get the idea. So it was the risk was in the timing and having to basically pay the money in advance of receiving the consummated closed sale.
Right. And then, and me tipping my hat of that fact.
Mm-hmm.
I think played into it.
Sorry, you think you might have played into it?
I think played into their decision to walk back on the number. Cause it wasn't, it was, I shouldn't have. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have. I probably shouldn't have said what I said. But like I said before, I get over that quick. It's just a thing. Yeah. And
have you read Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference?
Yeah. So I wish I was using labeling and mirroring and all the other techniques, because I would have done better.
Book. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you did just fine. It sounds like you just did very but it reminds me of, in that book, he talks about, I can't remember, but I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically he who talks the most loses. Right. You know what I mean? Like he's talking about the value of each morsel of information. And it sounds like in your case that slipping that bit of information might have given them a bit of leverage.
Yeah, I definitely didn't do it the way Chris would have done it. I'm quite sure of that.
It's a fun book for sure. And great stories, because it's like FBI terrorist type stories. Like they're all very, very dramatic and interesting contexts. And so
I think he says in there, right, you can't meet in the middle on a human being. Or something like that, right?
It's so true.
Like this whole meet in the middle stuff is just ridiculous. You can't meet in the middle on a human being.
Yeah.
So true. Makes sense.
Man, I mean, did you buy yourself a trophy? Tell me you bought yourself a trophy. You bought yourself a beach house or a fancy car. Did you do anything to celebrate?
Man, I'm going to sound boring here for a little while. I did. So the only thing I did that summer was I bought, so this happened in May. That summer I bought a Corvette. And then besides that, John, I didn't do anything for like 2 years. Except, get the money with an investment advisor. By the way, here's a funny story. So I didn't have my investment account set, like I was doing Schwab myself. I didn't have like a money advisor or anything. So, this is really dumb, but so I didn't have anything set up to receive the money except my checking account. So, so all of a sudden there's a decent chunk of money,
$50 million in your checking account.
Yeah. Right. So if you want to knock a banker off his seat, call him and say, I want to transfer money from my checking account to. There were like so many hoops I had to go through, like a voice authentication. Just a terrible idea. Don't ever do that. If when you do sell your business, have a proper place for the money to be deposited and someone who knows what they're doing to help you with it, because that's a dumb thing. That's a dumb thing.
I'm really glad you kind of raised life after the sale. I've done a bunch of interviews now, and one of them it seems that a lot of the entrepreneurs I talk with have a bit of a kind of a roller coaster of emotions that they go through. And I'm curious for you. I mean, you had that dinner where all those 4 or 5 folks seemed really happy having sold their company.
Yes.
I'd be curious to know, did you get that experience, or was it more nuanced? I mean, what was the emotional roller coaster like for you?
So I prepared myself before it occurred for 2 things. One, it wasn't going to change me, even though it did change my circumstances. And the second was, when I sell this, it's no longer mine. And I think that's one of the things that entrepreneurs have a really hard time with sometimes, is they want to sell it, they want the money, but they don't want to give up. They want to feel like they still own it. And you know what? When someone pays you for something, you don't own it anymore. And if they want to do something different with it, don't be offended. That's their prerogative. You would do the same thing if you were on the other side. And so getting myself clear about those couple of things up front, John, was really helpful, because afterward, I worked for the company for a couple of years, and I saw my job as being to help make them successful. They own this. If they want my opinion, they'll ask it, which they often did, very respectfully. Did they always follow what I thought was the best way? No, they didn't. And I could either pout about that, or say they're stupid, or do all these emotional things that I see a lot of other entrepreneurs do, or I could just say, how can I help you in the direction you want to go? How can I help you get there?
Well, I think sometimes it's because of the structure of the deal, right?
Well,
where
right.
an owner has an earnout, right? And the owner is like basically fighting with management to get the resources they need to hit the earnout. So in your case, what was the structure of your employment agreement? Did you have an earnout, or how did they structure that piece?
So there was no earnout. There was an escrow. That was the only thing. So
what's the difference for folks?
Yeah. So an escrow is money that's a portion of the sale price that's put aside for, in my case, it was 18 months. And that's there in case there's a problem with one of your warranties or representations. So when you sell a business, you effectively give your assurance that there's that you're not aware of any lawsuits or penalties or
unpaid taxes
or criminal charges or anything like that could affect the business. And it's a legitimate thing, because you may not know about you may not know about things that could actually happen. So they set aside that, they call that an escrow. In my case, they released half of it at 9 months, the other half at 18 months. An earnout is money that you get over time based on the performance of the business after the business closes. And I've done a lot of earnouts, and if you're dealing with the right people, earnouts are fine, but you don't know who the right people are. So having been through all kinds of things now, if you have a business that more than one company would be willing to buy, it's probably not in your best interest to take an earnout or a significant earnout. On the other hand, if you have a business that no one else wants to buy, you're probably going to take an earnout. But escrows really can't be messed with because there's a whole structure to how they work. Earnouts are accounting functions, and they can be manipulated isn't the right word, but they can be different interpretations of the same data. How's that?
So, Mike, why did you agree to stay on for 2 years after the sale? What was was there a financial incentive to do that? Was that part of the deal? Like, it seems like a long time.
Yeah. So interestingly, I did not have an employment agreement at all. So good question. Why did I choose to stay on? Because, and ultimately the thing I tell myself, and I hope this is right, John, is that I wanted our team to feel like I hadn't sold the business and run out on them. I told them that I thought, which I did, that, we'd be a platform company, there would be more opportunity, everyone's job would be preserved. And all of that did turn out to be true. I just wanted to make sure that it was true. And I probably stayed around too long to have that assurance. But yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why I stayed so long.
Why leave after 2 years?
It was just time. There was, it got to the point where, one of my team members had been promoted to my job. I started on working part-time, and then I was in special projects, and then all of a sudden nobody knew what to do with me. Right? So it was, there were no expectations any longer, John. So it was just like, I don't want to, that's not for me. So yeah, that's how that happened.
Well, I appreciate you sharing this story. What do you do now? Riding around in your vet?
Yeah, well, not when it's zero out like it is today, but yeah. So I have a new waste company that I started with a private equity partner a couple of years ago. So I'm taking a different sort of tact at it this time. So I've spent some time doing that. I've got a podcast called How Did It Happen that I love doing. I've been doing that for a couple of years. And I I really have conversations more than an interview because I don't ask any scripted questions except one, which is how did it happen for you? So I just have conversations with successful people about how they did it and what happened to them. And I lose my camera there for a second. Hang on a second.
That's okay. So it's called How Did It Happen? And,
How Did It Happen?
And folks can get that on iTunes, I'm assuming. And
yeah, Apple Podcasts.
Or
my website is MikeMalatesta.com. So that's really easy. Malatesta. So feel free.
I was teasing you before before we hit record that Malatesta sounds like a motorbike, like an Italian motorbike.
That's the first time I heard that. It was really cool for you to say that, John.
MikeMalatesta.com.
That's
and
right.
you can get How Did It Happen on all the big podcasting channels.
Yeah, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I guess wherever podcasts are, wherever you get your podcast, you can find my podcast. I hope.
That's awesome.
Should be.
That's awesome. So we'll look for How Did It Happen. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it was my pleasure, John. Thanks for asking me.
Hey, if you like today's episode, you're going to love my new book, The Art of Selling Your Business. The book was inspired by the cohort of my guests over the years who have been able to negotiate an exit far better than the benchmark in their industry, sometimes 2 or 3 times more than I would have expected. I was curious to understand the tactics and strategies of these entrepreneurs and what they do differently from average performers. The result is a playbook for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. To learn more, go to builttosell.com/selling, where we put together a collection of gifts for listeners who order the book. Just go to builttosell.com/selling.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/built-to-sell or on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.